Good evening. It's with great pleasure that I welcome all of you this evening on behalf of the Center for Faith Studies and Countryside Community United Church of Christ. This is an event that brings together people that are near and dear to us in our Omaha area community, as well as the people who are far and wide from us watching via the internet tonight as we stream live over Countryside's network onfaithonline.org. For 3 years now, we have had the privilege and honor to be asked by the Institute for Holocaust Education in Omaha to collaborate and host their community lecture that is part of their ambitious and important Week of Understanding. We especially welcome Dr. Inge Auerbacher this evening and to Countryside Church. The Center for Faith Studies at Countryside organizes a lecture series each year with the goal of bringing speakers and topics to our attention that will draw us together for education, critical thinking, fellowship, and spiritual growth. I invite you to consider coming back next Thursday, not Thursday of this week, but next Thursday evening, March 14th, to join us for our next lecture. It's a Radical Amazement lecture dedicated to the spirit of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, a great theologian who said, "Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement, to look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. To be spiritual is to be constantly amazed." In that spirit, we will present on March 14th, Katie Payne, an acoustics biologist and founder of the Elephant Listening Project. Katie recorded the songs of humpback whales in the North Atlantic and went on to study acoustic communication in African elephants. Recording the calls of creatures in the animal kingdom yields much rich information for us about both the animal communities themselves and a great deal about human behavior, especially as relates to the extent of our responsibility and sense of connection in this evolving world. There are flyers for this event on a table out there in the foyer tonight, and you can hunt me down as well after the presentation if you would like more information. On evenings such as this one tonight, I laud you for taking time to gather for something very precious and important, for stories and lessons that bear witness to the human spirit and hope. Thank you to everyone in this room and watching this broadcast for your presence and support and your desire to learn. Our evening will be amazing. It will be even more amazing if not one single cell phone interrupts our speaker. So now is a great time to turn off all of those phones. Thank you for doing that. After Dr. Auerbacher has given her presentation, we will have time for questions and answers. We have ushers with microphones who will come to you if you raise your hand. And out of respect for our speaker and our audience, we do ask that everyone use the microphones so we can hear and record clearly. After our time for Q&A, I would ask you to let Dr. Auerbacher leave the sanctuary first so that she can be ready to greet you in the foyer for a time with book signing, cookies, and coffee. I now welcome Donna Walter, the Education Coordinator at the Institute for Holocaust Education.
I'm delighted to see so many of you here this evening, and I want to say a special welcome to some students from Cedar Bluff. That's a hand, and from York College. I just thought I'd use my teacher voice and be loud enough. But welcome, and especially to students here from Cedar Bluff and York College. On behalf of the Institute for Holocaust Education, staff members Laura Stastny and Hillary Fletcher and I, we'd like to thank Cindy Kugler and the amazing group of people here at Countryside Community Church and the Center for Faith Studies for helping us and for partnering with us on what we know will be an incredible evening for you. Tonight's program is sponsored in part by the Shirley and Leonard Goldstein Supporting Foundation and the Omaha Public Schools Foundation. By Friday afternoon, 6 survivors, 1 liberator, and 3 additional survivors via video conferencing will have filled 24 speaking engagements and reached well over 5,000 students in Omaha, Wahoo, and thanks to Educational Service Units 2 and 17, through video conferencing, students as far away as Chadron and Nebraska City. These students, along with those of you gathered here tonight, will hear the voices of those who were eyewitnesses to the most unimaginable and inhumane period in history. In addition to our keynote speaker, many of those survivors are here tonight, and we'd like to ask all those survivors present if they would please stand and be recognized. Few, if any, in this audience can appreciate freedom to the same degree our survivors do. We know that freedom comes at a high price. The veterans of World War II and other wars have made huge sacrifices so that we might enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you are currently serving in the military or are a veteran, will you please stand and receive our thanks? Since the year 2000, when the Institute for Holocaust Education was formed by Executive Director Beth Dotan, our goal has been to inspire, honor, and educate. We work with students, teachers, and the community to create, the community to provide programs that use the lens of the Holocaust to educate and create a more just and equitable society. You will find in your programs, and many of them on the floor, some coupons for a discounted admission to the Strategic Air and Space Museum, where we have an exhibit called Searching for Humanity, Veterans, Victims, and Survivors of World War II. And this is based on our local liberators and survivors, so we encourage you to attend, to visit that exhibit. Our tradition of educating and special programming will continue to grow and expand as we welcome our new Executive Director, Liz Feldstern. Liz, will you please stand and be recognized? The unique opportunity to hear firsthand testimony from a survivor is both an honor and a privilege, which carries with it a responsibility to take action to prevent such atrocities from ever happening again. Tonight, we are honored to listen to the testimony of Inge Auerbacher. Inge's world changed when Hitler came to power. Inge was 7 in 1942 when she and her parents were sent to Terezin, a concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. She would remain there for 3 miserable years. Terezin was originally built for a population of 7,000, yet at times during the Holocaust, it was crowded with 60,000 prisoners. Inge and her parents miraculously survived. They immigrated to the United States in 1946. Inge has not let the nightmare of those war years hold her back. She is an accomplished author, a distinguished chemist, and has been recognized with several prestigious awards for her work teaching tolerance and human rights. We are grateful that Inge did not remain silent, and we are honored tonight to bear witness to Inge's testimony. Please welcome Dr. Inge Auerbacher.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming here today. And I want to thank especially the Institute for Holocaust Education and Dana Walter and her wonderful staff who have made me feel so very, very welcome. To start this evening, I would like to say Shalom. It's a wonderful greeting. It means peace, hello, goodbye. And I think that is my wish for everybody. We should live in peace together. I will start my talk with the beginning. When did it start? When did this nightmare begin? Now, 1938 to 1945 is now called the Holocaust. All these terrible years. What do we mean by this term? It means complete destruction by fire. A time when 11 million innocent people were killed. Who were these people? 6 million were Jews. Hitler had a special hatred against the Jewish people, and he wanted to kill every single Jew in Europe. But who were the 5 million others? And they must not be forgotten either. They were human beings too. They were Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, people with mental and physical difficulties, also some priests and some Poles. Anybody who was against Hitler was an enemy, had to be killed. Now, among those 6 million Jews were 1.5 million innocent children. And those 3 million children's eyes still haunt me, because their story was mine and mine was theirs. I was very, very lucky to stay alive, and I've made it my mission, especially since I'm retired now. I actually spoke also when I was still working. I worked for 38 years as a chemist, and I made it my mission to keep especially the children's lives alive, their stories, because we shared so many memories and they had the right to live. Now, I know we have some young people here in the audience, and you're probably thinking, well, this old lady here, she talks about something that happened so many years ago. Why do I have to know this? Why? Because had Hitler succeeded, who would have been the next group? And many of you children, even adults, would not be sitting here today. He didn't like blacks either. Now, Germany never had too many black people because they had some colonies in Africa. I never saw a black person until the end of World War II, when the soldiers came into the camp. I remember one child shook hands with a black soldier, and she took the hand away. She was afraid the color would come off. I never saw a black person before these soldiers came in. So some of these black people, by the way, were also killed during the Holocaust. We never had too many black people, but these were also enemies of this Nazi state. Now, I want to take you on a journey of my first 10 years growing up in Nazi Europe, and I shall do so with pictures and stories. But I also, at the end, I want to go a little bit what happened to me after the war, which is also quite interesting. It wasn't really such a happy ending. I was born on December 31, 1934, in a little village called Kippenheim. I know how old I am. You don't have to take out your computers. I'm 78. I can't believe it. I'm still that little girl, the 7-year-old. But that's life. Life goes on. I was born in Kippenheim, a little village in southwestern Germany, very close to France and Switzerland. And I was the last Jewish child born in that village of about 2,000 people, 60 Jewish families. In fact, one of the people from that community in Kippenheim is now today the richest man in Israel, and Warren Buffett bought his company. So when I heard, I knew he lived here, I wanted to pass by. And we saw the house. I was amazed. There was no protection, maybe some cameras. Here is one of the richest men in the whole world, and you can walk up to his stoop. I rang his bell. He wasn't there. But the person who took me has actually a brother-in-law who knows him very well. So I wanted to give him as a gift my first book, I'm a Star, which is now in 8 languages. And I wrote a dedication in there. And I said, well, I come from the same village as Steph Wertheimer, whose company you bought in Israel. I don't know if I will hear from him, but that's okay. It's a gift. No strings attached. Next. I had a big house. My family lived in that house at least 100 years. Jews lived in Kippenheim for more than 200 years. Actually, Jews in Germany lived to close to 2,000 years. Right after Christ, a few hundred years later, they came to Germany, following the Romans. So we didn't just come there yesterday. Jews lived in Germany forever. They were expelled at certain times, they came back, and so forth. Anyway, we had a very big house, a 17-room house, and there was no hospital in the village. And my father said, I am born in this house, she's going to be born in the house too. And when you look on the top floor, the two last windows, that is the room I was born in. The house still stands. My father was a textile merchant. We weren't millionaires, but we were comfortable. Next. And there was actually only one doctor. He wasn't Jewish. And he came, my mother had a very bad pregnancy, and he came to my mother's bedside very often wearing the Nazi uniform. He already belonged to the SS, but very strange, he still took very good care of his Jewish patients. In a sense, he gave me life. And after the war, he was put into jail because he probably got involved in the T4 program, meaning to kill the people with mental and physical difficulties. And he probably was involved in that, and he was in jail for many years because of that. My father had already a car, and that was very rare in those days. I think my mother married him because he had a car. It was it was just such a special thing, especially you have a beau with a car. The doctor had a car, and Daddy had a car. So here he was, and one of my first pictures. Next, I remained an only child. My father was a soldier in World War I. We were very good German citizens, totally assimilated, but we had a religion still. And I grew up in a modern Orthodox home. The synagogue was definitely the center of our lives. Now, my father was wounded very badly in World War I, and he would never be able to raise his right arm up again. Now, my great-grandmother, for instance, she had 14 children and 4 sons in the armed forces, 4, and 2 died for Germany. We were not outsiders. We fought for the country. We were Germans. Yes, we were Jews, but we also were very proud German citizens, as I am now a proud American citizen. Next. And here I'm in my sandbox. I think I was dreaming already at that time, I'm going to become a scientist someday, which I did. And they actually psychologically, some psychologists say, you know, if you like to, play around in the mud, things like that, maybe you will become a scientist. Well, I did. Next. A very nice outing to the Black Forest, which was very nearby, beautiful area, very good wine, by the way. We grow a lot of grapes. We have a wine princess even. And here I am with my parents and friends in my little dirndl dress. You know, this is the peasant dress all the little girls would wear with the apron. I was a German little girl. In fact, my parents gave me the name Inge, which was very popular at that time, to blend in. It could have been Rebecca, it could have been Sarah. With Sarah, we had to take on afterwards anyway. But they said Inge. That's short, and it's German. And later on, when I was in school, when the teachers said, Inge, stand up, all the girls would stand up. I noticed that Emily is now a very popular name, so when I sign books, a lot of Emilys come, but at that time was Inge. Next. And here is a little tower that was my favorite place in this little village. And I found out much later, this is my Sunday best, by the way, a little white hat and a maroon dress. I remember it. And this was built in honor of a tailor who owned our house before we did. He was not Jewish. And he went to Switzerland for his apprenticeship and met an Englishman who took him to London. And in London, he worked for a German tailor shop. And that tailor shop became one of the most fashionable houses in all of London. They made the uniforms for the guards and all those things. And he was called the Fashion King. He came back to Germany and gave money to the poor, became a big philanthropist, built a hospital, which was no longer in existence when I was born, an orphanage in the Black Forest, bread for the poor on his name day. And he was knighted for his good work. There is now a plaque for many years, I never looked at it, but now I do, that he was born in this house and that he was knighted for his good work. And today there's a plaque right next to him that I too was born in the same house. They put up this tower, a black tower, to honor him. And that was my most favorite place. So, next please. The time is now 1938. Times change. The bad things are about to begin. My grandparents, my mother's parents, were alive. My father's parents, I never knew. They had died way before I was born. And they lived about 200 miles away, came many times to see us, and they were quite religious, as you can see. My grandfather is wearing a hat, the kippah. Orthodox boys and men wear their head covered. The Muslims do the same thing. And so I did come from an Orthodox family, modern Orthodox. And one thing is very special in this picture, my doll. This doll would be the only object that would survive my years of incarceration in the camp. And she was a gift from my grandmother when I was 2 years old. Now, some years later, I found out, I was speaking in Germany, and they saw these pictures and they said, do you know that doll's name was actually Inge? That was the Inge model. And I never knew that. I named her Marlene after Marlene Dietrich. Now, I know there are some young people here. Well, she was a very famous actress. And sort of like Britney Spears, but a lot more famous even. Blonde, blue-eyed, that was my doll. Well, I found out some years ago, she was made for the 36 Olympics, the Hitler Olympics in Berlin. That's when our sprinter Jesse Owens won all these medals, and Hitler would not shake his hand because he was black. And they made a special doll for that time. She had a special hairdo, the Olympic roll, blue eyes, blonde hair, and that was my doll. So we made a film about that, the Olympic doll. And I got a new doll who's now the movie star of this film. Next. A Beautiful Synagogue. Now, a terrible event happened on November 9th and 10th in Germany and in Austria called Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. I was not even 4 years old, but I remember it as if it happened yesterday. Grandpa went to synagogue in the morning to say his morning prayers, and he was arrested and sent to the Dachau concentration camp, only because he was Jewish. Police came to our house and arrested my father. All boys and men from the age of 16 on were arrested on that day in Austria and in Germany and sent to concentration camps. In our area, it was Dachau. In some other areas, it was Buchenwald. And then the rumpus began. There were no more men and boys in the village, only women and children. They started to break the windows. Every window in our huge house was broken. And I remember how one of the hoodlums yelled and threw a stone through the broken window and said, "Look, the chandelier still hangs," and he threw a big rock through the window. My mother just pulled me away. And then we were hiding in the backyard shed until this terrible riot quieted down. At the end of the riot, we had to pay for the damage. All the windows had to be paid for. They started to burn all the synagogues. Now, in our village, the synagogue was very close to Christian houses. And they started to burn it, and they were scared that the Christian house would also go up in flames. But they desecrated the inside very, very badly. And for many years, next please, this is how it looked before its desecration. Beautiful chandeliers, our cantor. Now in the Jewish faith, you have a rabbi and a cantor. But really, the one who is really important is the cantor, because most of our prayers are sung. We didn't have a rabbi, but because anybody could actually lead the service. But Cantor Schwab was very, very important, and this was our cantor. And this beautiful picture was changed in one day. Next, please. This is what it looked like after its destruction inside. Now, we didn't have any pictures of this until a few years ago, when somebody went up to the attic and he found these pictures and he said, "This could be your synagogue," and it was. And it was completely demolished. They took out our Torah rolls, ripped them apart, and somebody told us that they even took these fragments of the parchment and draped the men as they were sent to the concentration camp of Dachau. And we found a few pieces, somebody gave it to us, burnt pieces. And believe it or not, that portion of the Torah, of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, dealt with fire. Very interesting. Next. And even children were watching, by the way, as this was going on. For many years, the synagogue looked like this. It became a storage area for pig food. You know, we do not eat pork, among other things. But this was used to store especially food for pigs. Today, it has been rebuilt and looks like this again. From the outside, certainly it looked like it was before. The 10 Commandments, the tablets are on top again, without any Hebrew lettering. It's a symbol that Jewish people lived here at one time, and it is used as a building where you have cultural events, not only Jewish, mainly Jewish background. I've spoken there a few times. You have concerts, and I have to tell you, the 2 most beautiful buildings in the village are the synagogue and the city hall. And the synagogue sits smack in the middle of the village. You can't miss it. Next. My father and my grandfather were a few weeks in Dachau, and somehow they permitted those men to come home again. Certainly they were quite broken down, and they told the stories what happened there. Before that time, my father really never wanted to leave Germany. He said, "Look, I have the Iron Cross, which is equal to the Purple Heart, high decoration. I fought for this country. That crazy Hitler, he's going to go away again." But he didn't. And when he was in Dachau, things became very, very different. They had to give up all their clothing and wore the blue and white striped uniform, stand at attention in the bitter cold for hours. And if somebody even wanted to blow their nose, they were hosed down with ice cold water. And that happened to my father a few times. And when my father said, "Look, I have the Iron Cross, I fought for this country," you can throw this away. It means nothing anymore. So when they came home again, my grandfather was quite ill. He was in the 60s, he had a bad heart. Anyway, my father decided it's time to leave, but it was too late. All the doors to the free world were closing very rapidly. There was a quota system in America. We had maybe a number that would come up in 10 years. We were close to the French-Swiss border, but you couldn't make a run for it. The borders were closed. Today, you take a little ferry and you're there in about 10 minutes, you're in France, and there's nobody there, but it was different. And we sold our house at a very cheap price, moved in with my grandparents to an even smaller village in southwestern Germany too, called Jebenhausen. It's between, whoever knows Stuttgart, it's between Stuttgart and Ulm, where Albert Einstein was born. And here, the village of about 1,000 people was at one time 40% Jewish. There was a baron there, and they were allowed to settle there as protected Jews, Schutzjuden. They had, about 200 years ago, they had to pay higher taxes, were allowed to have a street, not to build houses together with the Christians. They had to live separate, but they built a synagogue, and they had a place to bury the dead, and were allowed to butcher the animals kosher style. They had to get the permission. But about 1850, they went away, all these families, and went to America. They went to the bigger cities, except my branch. They stayed. So they were the last Jewish family living in this tiny little village. And the relationship between the Christians in that village was extremely good. My grandparents were very well respected. And when we moved there, I had wonderful friends. I still have them today. And we were not mistreated. Almost everybody was quite nice to us. Now, here was the Jewish street, which, of course, later on they intermixed. They lived together. And I remember walking up and down that street with my friends singing the songs of the day, which were many times Nazi songs. But we didn't even know what we were singing. And I did exactly the same as my friends. Many times I was the ringleader. Now, when you look, yes, I'm kind of a bossy lady, I guess. Anyway, when you look on the little street on the left side, one of the last houses there was a bakery, a little bakery. That belonged to Albert Einstein's aunt and uncle. Now, I found out many years later, to my dismay, that I didn't know it before, that he, as a little boy, of course, I mean, that was way before I was even born, came to that village. Of course, he went to see his aunt and uncle. And I always wanted to meet him. To me, he was my hero. I mean, I was going to be this crazy scientist, or Marie Curie, Albert Einstein. I wanted to be like them. But I didn't know it at that time. And he would have, most likely, I'm pretty sure, would have invited me to see him, because I was the only child who was transported from that entire state of Württemberg, which includes the capital, Stuttgart, who came back. I'm the only one from all the children who came back, who survived. Next. And this was my grandparents' house. My grandfather was a cattle dealer. Many of the Jewish people in the villages, they were not allowed to become tailors and other professions, but they weren't cattle dealers, small time. So when you see the black door on the right, that was the stable. And the other door was to our living quarters. And my grandfather used to put me on top of the cows. And it was about 2-3 years is the only childhood that I was ever really allowed to have. And when I go, especially to the Midwest, I want to see cows. I want to go into that stable. I want to smell that aroma again. For me, it's not bad. It brings back memories of the very short childhood I had. And I just was in Ohio, so they took me somewhere. And I will go to Montana in May to a big ranch. And oh, I can't wait to touch those cows and smile at them. Anyway, next. My best friend, Elizabeth, Christian girl, her mother was my mother's best friend. They lived across the street, and of course, we became best friends. Again, my doll is always with me. Next. She, unfortunately, is now a widow, but we speak to each other at Christmas, Easter, so forth. And whenever I'm over there, we can see each other. In 1939, a few months after Dachau, my grandfather dies because of a bad heart, physically and spiritually. He never wanted to leave his Jebenhausen. He wanted to die in his bed, which he did, and he was lucky in a way, because my grandmother died a very cruel death. And we are in front of his grave. It is the only grave in the whole Jewish cemetery, he's the last one to be buried there, that has just a plate, no standing up monument, because we were afraid already at that time that they would desecrate the cemetery, knock over the stones. And thank God nothing happened here. The grave is now very deep in the ground, but the plate, you can see everything still. It was not desecrated. And again, I'm wearing my dirndl dress, little German girl. Next. In my hometown, now we were no longer there, we moved in 39. And in 1940, the first transports to the camps began in the state of Baden, my home state. And all the Jews were sent to a camp called Gurs, Camp de Gurs, up in Spain and France, up in the Basque country, where Spain and France are in a dispute still today. And it was a horrible place too. It was actually a Spanish prison with barracks and a lot of mud. And they were told in a half an hour or so to pack their bags and leave. Had we been there at that time, this happened in October of 1940, we would have been also transported already there. Now, in Gurs, there was a little opportunity to still get out with great difficulty. But the route was Gurs, Rifsal, Drancy, Auschwitz, and many of the people were on that route. Now here, again, somebody had some pictures up in the attic, took them secretly. It was of the actual transport to this camp from my hometown. And there are quite a few family members in there who were sent away. And here you have, for instance, those three people there. The last one, those are all relatives of mine, second cousin, third cousin. I mean, when you live in a little community like that, everybody's related, basically. And they made it out to Morocco some way, somehow. And he is now a librarian in the Library of Congress. Now, that girl standing there, very interesting. Christian girl. And we know who she is. She might still be alive. I did speak to her. And I said to her, what were you thinking as your friends are being taken away? She said, well, I just wanted to look. And as Elie Wiesel said, whoever is a bystander is equally guilty, because that is exactly what happened. The people were bystanders and just gawked and couldn't care less what happened to us. Next. There are a few pictures, but they're very important. He is also a cousin of ours. He didn't make it. He was sent to Auschwitz. Next. But these pictures are very important for one reason. There are very few pictures around of the deportation of the German Jews to the camps. There's more available from the Polish people, but we never had many Jews in Germany. 500,000, that's it. That's the whole population of the Jews in Germany. And in Poland, it was 3 million, so it was 20% of the population. So these pictures are precious. Here again, the whole town is watching. Even there's a cow in there that is watching. Next, one more picture. And this man, we knew who he was. And we showed the picture to his daughter, who got out to America. And she said, no, that's not my father. He would never travel like that with a rope around his suitcase. He's an elegant man. He would be ashamed, but it was he. And he was unfortunately sent to Auschwitz and did not make it. Next. In 1941, I'm still living now in this little village. So far, I have been spared. School had to begin. I'm 6 years old. But Jewish children were no longer allowed to go to the school where they lived. There was one school for the entire state in Stuttgart, the capital. And I had to have travel permission papers. You could no longer go freely without travel permission, and it was very difficult to get. And of course, you had to take the name, the way Sarah, middle name, and the man Israel to show that they are Jewish. And people are always asking, why didn't you go into hiding? When you come from little villages like that, little towns, everybody knew you. Where are you going to go? Where? Perhaps in Berlin it was a little easier, but where I came from, I mean, people knew us far and wide. No possibility at all. And I went every day by train, an hour by train. First I had to walk, actually, from the village. In the beginning, we still lived in the village, about 2 miles to the train station, and then an hour by train. Today, it's about 20 minutes by train. In the beginning, my father took me, and later on, they had to do slave labor. And I went all by myself. When I think about it, 6-year-old child by herself, be on a train and then walk a big distance to the school. And it became even more difficult when that same year in 41, we had to wear the yellow Star of David, the yellow badge. Next. Here's one of the classrooms. Next, please. And wear this yellow star. We had to buy those stars. They came on a yellow sheet. You cut it out, and I brought one with me, the one I wore, with the word Jude, Jew. It came in different versions, Juif, French, and Jood in Dutch, J-O-O-D. And it was terrible material, so my mother put a backing on it to be able to sew it on your clothes. From the age of 6 on, you had to wear that yellow star. You can still see the threads on it, which I ripped off the star on May 8, 1945, when I was liberated from Terezin. And that's how I actually got the title of my first book, I Am a Star, turning this negative symbol, which was supposed to make me a terrible person, into something positive. So for me, the star is that I'm turning this negative symbol into something positive. For me, every human being is a star. Now, my father told me, next please, sit in such a way on the train, try, lean against the left window, that these boys and girls who would heckle me, you dirty Jew, and call me bad names, could beat me up. I was as clean as they, believe me. And so it was not always possible. So I tried to lean against the left window. I remember only one incident where a Christian woman came up to me. She didn't talk to me. She wasn't allowed. Anyway, Christians were not allowed to talk to Jews anymore. And she put a little bag, brown paper bag with rolls in it next to my seat, walked away. To me, this act of kindness was heroic. Whenever I speak in any country or across the country here in America or wherever I am, I talk about this anonymous woman, never had a name, she walked away. She will never be forgotten. One never knows, even a small act of kindness, how that helped me at that time. Had more people done just a little something, maybe this horrible thing wouldn't have gone to the ends it did. Next. In 1941, school closed. I never finished my first grade. 6 months of schooling, it stopped because the transport started in this part of Germany to what is called the East, to the camps. We got our order for transport, my grandmother and my mother and I. And of course, my father was already an alumnus of a camp. He said, you know, we have to try to get out of this camp, out of this transport. We don't know where these transports are going. Can't be good. I was in Dachau. I know how things are in those places. And he wrote a letter to the Gestapo, the secret police, that he was a disabled war veteran, and could he be spared and the family? Somehow, we were. It was a miracle, but not almost my entire school and my grandmother. I should be trying to get my grandmother out, no possibility. I shall never forget the sad goodbye. My mother knew she would never see her mother again. They were sent to a place called Riga in Latvia, which is near Russia. Almost as soon as they arrived there, they were sent to the forest. The German Jews were sent to the Birkenike forest, the Latvian Jews mostly to the Rumbula forest. And I decided a few years ago, I wanted to say goodbye to my grandmother. I wanted to go to that horrible place. I saw Auschwitz and other places. I went back to my camp. But that was always what you call the bucket list. I need to go there and say a prayer for her. And I went, and there's a big memorial there with a gazebo and prayers and so forth, and jagged rocks, but that's not where the graves are. And you have to walk a hill, and there are 52 mass graves, cement around it, between 50 and 80,000 people buried there. And for all intents and purposes, I should have been in that grave. I remember I took a cover of the German version of I'm a Star that has the picture of her and my grandfather. And I wrote her in German. I took a candle with me and a little rock. We take pebbles always when we put on gravestones. So I took a pebble from my parents' grave, near the grave, and I put it in a certain place where they had the plaque, Stuttgart. And I wrote her in German, Liebe Oma, ich werde dich nie vergessen. My dearest grandma, I will never forget you, in German. Well, because I thought, well, if she wants to read this, she doesn't know English. I had to write it in German. And I lit a candle. And that was my goodbye to my grandmother, whom I absolutely adored. Now, when she was sent away, they told us to leave the house. They took the house away. We never sold it. And we were sent to houses in the neighboring village, only Jewish houses, in a slum area, kind of. And here are still some of the children alive, a few. And as an example, only a small example, the only one who would stay alive is the one with the striped hat. Me. All these children were killed. School stopped. Never finished my first grade. 6 months, first grade, I could read, I could write, and do a little math. Pretty good. Next. Then the papers came again. I have a copy here. It's not so easy to read it here. A few pages, the same pages again. And this time it said, you cannot get out of this transport. This was in 1942 in August. And even if you bring 10,000 medical notes from doctors, nothing will help. You have to go. And my number was 13-1-408. 13 meaning the first transport to Terezin number 1, and 408 my number. Now I played those numbers once in a lotto. I didn't win. But to me, those numbers were still very lucky numbers. The transport had 1,200 people. I was the youngest. I was 7 years old. And at the end of 3 years, there were 13 survivors out of that 1,200 people. 3 of them from my family. A miracle, a family intact. Next. And this is how a transport was put together. Certainly, we didn't have any more cameras, but I had a friend, an artist. He saw some of the poems I wrote in the book. It's not only poetry. And he saw pictures. And they told us to assemble at a school gymnasium, all, from the state. Each town would gather 100 people, 50 people to make a transport of 1,200. And they told us to open up everything. There were tables there, and I had a little Dutch boy pin. And one of the guards ripped it off me in the Swabian dialect. He yelled at me, "Du brauchst es nicht, wo du hingehst," meaning, you won't need this where you're going to. I'm 7 years old. Then I had my doll in my arm. He tore her from me, and I was not going to give that creep my doll. And so he lifted her head to see if I was hiding anything inside. Of course I wasn't, and somehow he gave me back my doll. That's why I still had her. Next. Then we were sent to the main gathering place. Now, this is an actual little film that they made of my grandmother's transport. They were very orderly. They wanted to show this is going so well. By the way, my transport left on a Saturday, a Shabbos, and to make us feel even worse. On our Sunday, our Sabbath, Saturday, they told us that's the day we have to leave, to make it even worse for us. And this is actually the transport that my grandmother was on. But I was a few months later in the same two large halls before transport. And there is somebody in that picture in the middle, I can't quite show it, who looks like my grandmother. I can't be sure. I cannot swear to it. But it could be her, and this could be her last picture. Next. And in the morning, waiting for the train to come, we were there about 2 days. So today, when they're saying, this never happened, this Holocaust deniers, Germans were very meticulous in taking pictures of everything and noting everything, have very good records. It happened. And those ovens in Auschwitz didn't bake any bread, as some of these people were saying. I saw Auschwitz. Believe me, you wouldn't want to eat bread that came out of those ovens. Next. And everybody in Germany had an ID. We had a J on it, Jew. Now, I know in America it's good to have an ID. You have a driver's license. I don't even have a driver's license. I don't need it. I live in New York. I have the subway very nearby. And, but in Germany, we had to have it. And what they did, when we were deported, they stamped on it in red, umgesiedelt, meaning resettled. Oh yeah, we're going to a beautiful apartment. And 22nd of August, 1942. I'm going to a nice new place. Next. We were on the train for about 2 days. It was a regular train yet, not a boxcar, very crowded. And the SS, the stormtroopers were on the train. You couldn't get out anymore. And we really didn't know where we were going. We could see that the signs on the train station looked very unfamiliar, the language. We were going into Czechoslovakia. And next, we arrive in a town called Bauschwitz, not Auschwitz, Bauschwitz, and were told to drop everything and march, except your bedroll and your metal dishes. And I had my doll in my arm and dragging a little duffel bag. And my parents put me between them because they were whipping us as we were marching. We had many old people on that transport, and many couldn't walk these 2 kilometers, 2 miles into the camp, and they fell by the wayside. I really don't even know what happened to them. They probably died on the way. Next. And we're marching, and again, this did not happen in the middle of the night. It was daytime. People saw us. Nobody cared. And again, I got this picture from an archive. So people were looking out these windows and they didn't think at all, what happened to them? Where are these people going to? We don't see them anymore. Marching into the camp. Next. Marching into the camp. Next. And we arrive in a place called Terezen in Czech, or Terezenstart in German. It was an actual little town, army garrison town, built in the late 18th century by Emperor Joseph II in memory of his mother Maria Theresia. And it contained brick barracks, high walls, totally sealed off from the outside world, barbed wire and wooden fences. And there was room, like you said, Donna, for about 7,000 people. At any one time, they would put in 70,000 people. Between 1941 and 1945, 140,000 people went through it. It was a transit place. You keep the people, for a little while, like you keep cattle before the slaughter, and then you kill them. At that time, we didn't have gas chambers. They were being built at the end, not complete. But 2/3 of these people who were there would be sent to the killing centers, mostly to Auschwitz. Close to a third died there of malnutrition. We were 14,000 children there. Maybe about 1% made it under the age of 15. Very, very precious few made it. Next. And then we got, for instance, then we had very famous people in Terezin. The best artists, the best doctors, best lawyers, highly educated people, college professors. The intelligentsia of Europe was sent to Terezin. Perhaps they wanted to exchange them one day for other things. And here is one of the brick barracks. The one we were sent to was even higher, to the attic. It was very, very hot on the floor. No, just a blanket, nothing else, bare floor. And it was extremely hot. And I saw these white sheets on the floor. And I never had seen a dead body before because my parents didn't even permit me to come to my grandfather's funeral. I was too young, they said. 5 years old is too young, you don't have to go. Go to your girlfriend. And I lifted one of the sheets, all bodies, all over the place. Soon afterwards, there was an epidemic of scarlet fever, and all the children got it. So, of course, after the incubation time, after a few weeks, I had scarlet fever. Next. And I was sent to a so-called hospital. Here are some of the walls that surrounded us with the deep water-filled trenches, and the guards were marching on top. Kids are always asking me, why didn't you just jump down? Well, first of all, you would break your bones. You didn't have good clothing. You had no money. Everything was taken from you. And who would help you on the outside? There were some escapes, very, very few. And if they were caught and found out, it made our life even worse. We were punished for them running, trying to get out. Next. Here is the hospital that I was sent to. It wasn't really a hospital. There were some rooms set up for the sick children. My partner was a baby from Luxembourg, and that bed was always wet. We couldn't help it. Our parents were not allowed to see us, so I didn't see my parents from about September till just before my 8th birthday. Next. Now, most men, women, and children had to live separate. They could still see each other. But the disabled war veterans lived in a certain area together. So I was allowed to stay with my parents in a tiny, tiny room. You couldn't move around. Your bed became your home. Double-deck bunk beds. We shared it for 2 years out of the 3 with a family from Berlin. They had a daughter exactly my age. She was 2 months older. And the father walked with a limp. The father was half Jewish, the mother totally, and Ruth was brought up as a devout Christian. I remember she would say the Our Father at night. I said my Shema Israel at night. And I remember she was folding her hands. We don't do that. So it was very strange for me. And she had exactly the same doll. Unfortunately, that child and the whole family was sent to Auschwitz in 1944. She didn't make it before her 10th birthday, my very, very best friend. We saw men with legs off, arms off, holes in their heads, and we were surrounded by our fathers who had fought in World War I and badly injured. Next. And then we were sent to these broken down houses where we lived. And this picture was taken after liberation by the Russians, double and triple deck bunk beds. As you know, you've seen these a lot of times from films, etc., and descriptions. Next. And the pumps from which we pumped our water. So many people got dysentery and typhus fever. And you could take maybe 2 showers a year with permission. Men in one room, the women took their children. And next, please. And the carts which delivered the bread ration, you got bread ration once a week. Not really good bread, and not much. And my mother would mark it off, Monday to Tuesday there, Tuesday, Wednesday on the next portion. If you cut in the next day's portion, you didn't have any bread. Next. And they were also used to bring the bodies to the crematory. This picture was also taken after liberation. Nobody had any camera. There were no pictures taken. And 3 times a day we had to stand in line with our metal dishes in hand. In the morning it was like a black liquid they call coffee. It was good for cleaning clothes. It was like a detergent. Lunch was maybe a little soup with some, who knows, floating in it, some kind of objects, maybe some turnips. The turnips were the only vegetable I had in 3 years, the only, and maybe a potato. And that's about it. And in the evening, again, the same thing. It was not enough to die and not enough to live. So many people got sick with malnutrition. The latrines were quite far away and became extremely difficult when you had dysentery. And many people did, and they died of it. Next. What did we children do? Well, we were good for nothing for them. We couldn't work. My mother worked, but I played around in the garbage dump, hoping to find a little piece from a potato, a rotten potato, still a good piece to cut up, a turnip, a boiled horse bone. I actually didn't see any meat in 3 years, maybe not even a sliver. It's like a thread of meat. And these were our games. Our companions were mice, rat, fleas, and bedbugs. Certainly, I was covered with lice, totally. So my hair was cut very short. Next. My mother worked in the so-called hospital for old women, geriatric women, very bad condition. And I remember one morning I came there, and they had sticks in their hands. I said, what happened? Turned out the night before, one of them felt something heavy on their shoulder. She turned around, a rat is sitting on her shoulder. Now you're wondering, who did these pictures? We had some incredible artists who drew in secret. And if they were caught, they were immediately sent to Auschwitz to be killed. They also worked for the Nazi machinery, whatever, in the offices, and they had to do some drawings, and sometimes they stole some paper and a pencil, and they drew in secret. And I remember just before we came to the camp, they had a hanging of quite a few of these men in the public square because they drew the real conditions of the camp. Next. But luckily, many of these pictures were saved. The worst that I can remember happened on November 11th, 43. They said people were missing. They knew exactly how many people were there. And they took us out to this ravine outside of the camp, and completely surrounded by soldiers and guns pointing at us. They didn't shoot, but they pointed. And we were standing there all day. They were counting, but they knew already how many people were there, whipping us. There were no bathrooms, no food all day, until the night. I read later on that was some news leaked out to the British radio, the BBC, that there are people standing there, 40,000 or so. Perhaps they will be shot, maybe they will be sent out. And orders came from Berlin to ship us all back to the camp, but not before. They were yelling, men, women, and children separate. And there was a very bad SS man, the worst in the camp. His name was Heindl. And he took his rifle butt and beat my mother very badly because we were trying to stay together, and he didn't want that. It was a horrible day. People died on the field, many, many people. We really thought, this is it. They're going to shoot us that day. Next. School was absolutely forbidden, but some heroic teachers taught us from memory. I learned a little English poem. This woman from Hamburg knew a little bit of English. There were some classes there. I know you have read the book, I Never Saw Another Butterfly. That's why I'm wearing the butterfly, to honor the children who were murdered. They wrote poems and had a wonderful teacher, and those were for the Czech children. The German children did not fare as well. So I had really no real schooling. It was forbidden anyway. It was called Keeping Busy. And I learned this little poem. I wish I were a little bird up in the bright blue sky that sings and flies just very well, and no one asked him why. Now, I didn't know English. My father found this little notebook in the garbage and a pencil, and I think I had pretty good handwriting for a child who only had 6 months of schooling. It's better than what I do now. But a few months ago, I decided to Google this poem. Who wrote it? I mean, where did she get this poem from? And lo and behold, I come to a site that this poem, almost word for word, was written by a slave American child and finished it in his or her words. And it's very interesting. I finished this poem in my book. I must start in my words, my dreams. What do I wish for? What do I want? I want food. I want to sleep in a good bed. And he almost said this, or he or she almost said the same thing, but it was anonymous. And so how interesting. 2 slave children, so to speak, side by side, one a Jewish child, one a black child, with the same dreams. Next. In 1944, there was an international Red Cross inspection. Finally, the International Red Cross was kind of pushed into seeing one of these camps. Is it true that all these millions of people are being killed? So they decided to show them Terezin, but not before they made a big deception. They printed money, which was like monopoly money. You couldn't buy anything except maybe some mustard, which made you even more hungry. Put up signs to school, to playground. None of these things existed. A gazebo was built where musicians were playing. They put on opera, children's opera, Brundibar, which was also shown here in Omaha. It was also performed. It was not written in Terezin. It was written way before, but the children performed it. And a film was made. You can see part of that film on YouTube, by the way, and of the good condition. Everybody's smiling, and they only took the people who looked halfway decent. Some of the children got sardine sandwiches, and they had to say, "Oh, Uncle Ram was our camp commandant. Do we have again sardines? We're tired of them. We want to play." And I have a friend who had to say that. Of course we had no sardines, nothing. They ate them up so quickly that they had to replenish them. And the International Red Cross went away believing this hoax that everything is fine. And as soon as they were out of sight, almost the whole camp was sent to Auschwitz. There were big selections, and somehow we passed the selection. There was a red circle drawn around our name. And I'm here today for the reason, I have no clue. You couldn't do anything. Next. They didn't show them the crematory, where more than 30,000 were burned, who had died, certainly. Next. And finally, on May 8th, 1945, I was liberated by the Russian army. But not before. They burned a lot of the records. Black pieces of paper was floating through the air. And a lot of noise. The trucks were moving out. And I remember jumping one of the barricades. I was quite a real ghetto child by that time, 10 years old. And I wanted to see what's going on. And I heard a tremendous explosion. And I touched my head. I thought my head flew off. And they were throwing hand grenades into the camp as they were fleeing, as they were running away. And my father found a hole in the ground, a cellar. Was dark, and somebody brought a little candle with them. And we were hiding down there. The only thing that I took with me that evening was not my doll, but a prayer book that my father found in the garbage. It belonged to a former soldier of World War I. His name was in it. He was from Nuremberg. I still have that prayer book. I never prayed so hard in my life for my life. And there's a prayer we have. The most important prayer is for the Jewish people is the Shema Yisrael, and it's like you're our Father, and I'll sing it for you. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. We really shouldn't speak of God's name in vain. We should say, instead of Adonai, God's name, Adoshem, his name. But I would never, I used to travel with that prayer book, but now I'm a little bit nervous in case I get caught somewhere. Who knows? Then right away I'm in trouble. But anyway, I still kept that prayer book. 10 minutes to 9, somebody walked up from this hole. He said, the Russians are here, we're free. We couldn't believe it, couldn't believe it. Who is still alive? What will happen to us now? There was such a tremendous typhus epidemic, we could not leave right away. It was even written up in the New York Times. Next. And then finally a bus came from Stuttgart to pick up the few survivors. Now here we also had some death marches which came at the end of the war because Auschwitz was already liberated in January. That's why we have International Holocaust Day. That coincides with the liberation of Auschwitz. Now we were liberated in May. And they were bringing in these people in terrible conditions from Buchenwald, from Riga, anywhere. And they still hoped to kill them because the gas chambers were being prepared in Terezin. Next. So we went back to Göppingen, hoping maybe my grandmother would still be alive. Of course she wasn't. We lost at least 13 immediate members, 20 altogether. We only stayed 9 months in Germany, and then came with the second displaced persons boat to America. And it was not a happy time for me. As soon as I got to America a few weeks later, I developed a terrible cold. Now, I knew in the camp there was a girl who was very sick with a disease, and our parents said, don't go near her. She has a terrible sickness, and you'll catch it. And we still played with her, and she got a little bit more food. She got an extra piece of bread, and I prayed to God. I said, God, I don't care what she has. I want more food. Give me what she has. Fortunately, what was it? It was tuberculosis. So when I came here, they didn't take any extra. I did feel better after the war. I didn't, but as soon as I came here, I had a very bad cold, and everything started again. Immediately to the hospital. 2 years in bed. Here I'm in prison for 3 years, no freedom, again in bed, no freedom, nothing. And there was no medicine at that time. And I did come home and no real school. And my parents were working different places. Finally, we had an apartment in Brooklyn, and I still couldn't go to school because he's still sick until antibiotic came around, streptomycin and other drugs. Finally, at age 15, I went to school for the first time in my life. 15. And I finished high school in 3 years instead of 4, going to summer school. Started college, sick again, another year in bed. And I lost 8 years of schooling in my life, but I studied and became a chemist. Some years ago, I decided to go back to Europe in the 60s for the first time to see, did I dream this? It must have been a dream, and I wanted to go back. So I went, the Russians were actually still there, so it was very difficult. You had to have permission. I didn't tell my parents I was going because they would have said, don't go, but I went. And here, so I went through the gate, 60 kilometers north of Prague. Next, please. And through the gate I originally went to in 42. Next. It's almost over. And I went to the house where I lived 2 out of the 3 years, slum area. Today, it's rebuilt. People are living there again. And I was there about a year ago. I couldn't recognize the house. Next, here the rats were crawling around. And this was a train street. From here, the tracks went straight to Auschwitz, from that street. It's also where the barricade was, where the hand grenades were thrown, and people were still killed. Next. And the crematory, is a mayor there again. It's a town again. And he told me, don't take pictures, but I did. Next. And the crematory, which today is a very big memorial, thousands of people come there, 4 ovens. Next. And red flowers depicting blood. It's even bigger today than it was here in the picture. Next. And I went back to my mother's hometown for the first time to thank the people who helped us. And here's one more picture, which is probably the most important for me. Next, please. It's the grave of our beloved Teresa. Teresa was my mother's maid and good friend. And when we came back, we said we're going to Teresa. She was the one who saved 2 photo albums. That's why you are seeing pictures here. Otherwise, there would be nothing. She put it in her basement, and she saved our prayer books and a few knickknacks. And they said, she's no longer alive. What happened? She wasn't old. Well, when the Americans came to that part of Germany, they knocked on the door. Of course, they were the victors. Open up. They were scared somebody would shoot out. She's standing behind the door, doesn't understand a word of English. And the soldier was sort of ambitious, shot through the door, killing her instantly. Yeah. And I say, if there's a heaven, I hope there is, that there are 2 women, wonderful women, walking hand in hand, 2 wonderful friends. One, a Christian woman, and a Jewish woman, forever united. One killed by a Nazi bullet, and the other by war. And I thank you so much. Thank you. I know I told a long story, but perhaps you still have some questions. Yeah, I'm not married. You haven't asked that yet. I never married. I don't have children, so the kids of the world are my children. But at Christmas, I can't give everybody, or Hanukkah, everybody a gift. Yes. Okay, there were some questions. Oh, okay.
You mentioned that your grandmother was sent to some place in Latvia, and it sounds like to me it was most of the people that went there were executed. Am I correct? Or what's
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely. Very few survivors.
Okay.
In Riga. Yes. Anybody? Please don't be afraid. I always say to the kids, no question is stupid. It's stupid not to ask. Because we are the last voices that you can actually ask. After this, you'll have to see it in the movies, read in books, and of course you can say, it's Hollywood, they make it up. Or they embellished in their books. But here you see a person in front of you. And also with you and with all these survivors here who are still able to tell the story and take advantage of that. Because another 10 years or so, well, may God give us many more years, but the reality is we're gone.
I had 2 questions. One is there a recording of your story that is available for purchase so that we can hear your words and other people can hear your words? The other question is, I had not heard I was surprised when you said that your father and grandfather had been released from Dachau. I didn't realize that anyone was ever released from there. Could you explain what the reasoning was for doing that?
It was early. Actually, my mother bought a bogus ticket to South America, whatever. They did accept that. But at that time, it was early. It was 1938. It was like, let's play a little with them. You know, let's see what, you know, they wanted us to leave, obviously, but the countries of the free world weren't accepting us. In fact, there was an ad, a story in, I think, even New York Times, Jews for sale, who wants them? Yeah.
Do you have any ill effects from all that? Because you look so healthy now.
Well, I'm good. I'm strong. I always was healthy. That's the whole thing. In fact, when I was born, my doctor said, well, this is how a healthy baby should look. And I was a very tough cookie all my life, and I'm an optimistic person. I fought like hell to get better, to be honest with you. Even that I had to take 2 shots of streptomycin, they're not a pleasure. Any doctors in the audience? Anybody a doctor knows about streptomycin? It could cause deafness. But I met the man who actually is a co-discoverer of that antibiotic, and I met him in person, never knew about it. Nobel was given for it. First drug against TB. And to meet that man, he lived in Philadelphia, to put my arms around and say, thank you for saving my life. He saved Bob Dole's life too. He had an infection that wouldn't be healed with penicillin. And to take 26 pills every day for years, get sick from morning to night, but I wanted to live. I was even accepted to medical school. I really wanted to be a doctor because I was in medicine all my life. Yes. No, I'm a strong horse. I'm healthy.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you for your presentation, but we recently saw the movie Schindler's List, and I was wondering if you had any interrelationships with Officer Schindler or
No.
the work that he had done.
No, because I mean, I didn't live in that part. I didn't live in Poland, but I did visit the Schindler factory. I sat in his chair in his office that he had. I spent the whole month in Poland a year ago because I wrote a book together with a Polish Catholic girl who also went through labor camps, etc. So we spoke in many, many places in Poland, in Lublin, Catholic University Lublin, and Warsaw, in different towns in Poland. But one thing you haven't asked me yet, I'm surprised. I'm going to talk to you about that, forgiveness. People are always asking me, you go back, you come to us, especially ministers, you forgive us, right? I said, no, I don't forgive. I believe in reconciliation, but the people who actually pulled the triggers, put the gas in, I will never forgive them. There is no forgiveness. God can forgive if he wants to. I've had these discussions with rabbis, priests together. And as far as I understand, now somebody can correct me, maybe you know better, that in the Jewish faith, if it is premeditated murder, that only the person who was murdered can forgive. Am I right about that? Certainly, it's personal. You can do what you want. But how would you forgive a person like Dr. Mengele, who stood at the ramp, left, right, who experimented on children, who experimented on adults? What forgiveness? Now his son lives about a half an hour from where I was born, in Freiburg. He's still there. He became a lawyer, Rolf Mengele, and he changed his name to his mother's maiden name. Now his granddaughter was in a class where a friend of mine spoke. She didn't say Mengele's granddaughter. Now I cannot blame that child. She had nothing to do with it. But I do believe I want to become friends again, and I go to Germany every year at least once. I'm going again in June. And I believe that we can become friends again. I mean, these young people, of course, we all have to be watchful of things happening again. And there are right-wing movements in Germany again, as there are in many parts of the world again. And well, in Germany, the German Jews are just about extinct in Germany. Well, you had 500,000 only. You have a lot of Russian Jews who settled there. That's it. Now, I lost my citizenship. I had citizenship maybe 6 months of my life when it was taken. Because in 1934, already the Jews were stateless. And they would give it back to me. I don't want it at this point. I'm an American. I'm proud. I don't want to be anything else. I want to be an American, period.
Where is
Yes.
Where is your doll now?
The doll, actually, they begged me to give the Holocaust Museum in Washington begged me to give the doll 20 years ago when they opened up the children's exhibit, Daniel's Story. It was a make-believe story, but to show children you saw the way what happened. And they opened it in New York City, and they said, "Can't you give us your doll, please, please?" My mother said, "I don't know, why don't you keep it?" She was not in such good shape anymore. She was made out of cellulose, which was very flammable, by the way. Well, I did give it to them because they promised. I said, "Only if you promise me you will put her in the permanent exhibition. I want to share with the children of the world." They always ask me, because I always talk about her in my books. I have 6 now, and to talk about it. And they reneged. They showed that doll once in 20 years. And it really hurts me a great deal. She's somewhere in a box. I gave it to them in cotton all around because she's very brittle. And that she's not shown. Once she was shown in New York, they let her be borrowed. And I know I'm going Sunday, by the way, to Italy. I've been invited to speak in Bolzano, where they're reading I'm a Star in German, believe it or not, they wrote to me. And I'm flying to Venice this Sunday. I'm going to be home in New York one day, and then it's off to Venice. And Bolzano and Pavia, the 3 cities where I will speak. I don't know if I'll speak German or probably English. And they have to translate. That's okay. I love Italy anyway.
A question here.
Yes.
You mentioned a woman on the train that put a bag of rolls next to you.
Yes.
Did you ever experience when you're in the camp act of kindness from a guard or from somebody that that would normally be cruel or mean? Did you ever experience anybody being kind or see that?
None of the guards were kind.
Yeah.
None. Not to me anyway.
Yeah.
I remember one Jewish woman, a Czech woman, when we came, she asked if there were any children in the transport, because we're lying there under the roof, they're hot on the floor, horrible conditions. And she had been there a few months earlier. Her name was Mrs. Rinder, and I wrote a poem about an angel in hell. And they said, yes, one, 7-year-old Inge. And then she said her son was already living, they were there longer, so they had a little better conditions already, and that he had a mattress which could be cut into 3-piece, was like 3-piece mattress. She gave me a piece of her mattress. And her husband worked in the kitchen, so afterwards he would always give us maybe a little bowl of soup or something extra. And the horrible thing was that in 44, when the major transports went, they went all the time, but in 44, almost the whole camp was emptied. She and the husband and the 6-year-old boy were sent out. Now, I found out some years later the husband did survive, but Tommy and Mrs. Rinder did not. They went straight into the gas.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Dr. Frankel wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that we should all make triumph out of tragedy, if at all possible. Apparently you have done that. Where do you think you got that motivation?
I think it was my dad. And when we were standing, by the way, in this horrible outing there, my mother was hysterical. He said, We're not getting out of this. So he soothed her in his own way, and he said, you'll see, you'll ride in a car again. That's my dad, you know, and thank God I inherited his spirit. I never give up with anything, even when it was with publishing. You know how tough publishing is? Good Lord. You know, I mean, I had the gumption to walk into Simon & Schuster with my elbows this wide. I said, you got to hear me. And I got it. But, you know, when I was sick, I said, I'm going to live. I don't care. And I'm going to make it, even if my stomach gurgles, you know, with all these pills, sick from morning to night. I'm just a fighter. I do not give up. Because if you give up, you have nothing. You have absolutely nothing. I have a girlfriend who went to her PhD in Lincoln, here in the University of Nebraska, from New York. She had a teaching fellowship. Very good writer, a lot better than I am. But she can't get published. I said, well, why don't you go out? Why don't you learn the internet? Why don't you, well, I hate the email. She can't even do email. PhD, Phi Beta Kappa, 2 masters. I said, my God, get with a program like Oprah said. But that's the point. I don't wait for people to come to me. I have to go to them. And that's it. Nothing happens if you sit in a room waiting for things to happen. And had my father not written that letter to the Gestapo at that time, I wouldn't be here either. Of course, he missed the chance early enough to get the heck out of Germany. He wasn't, you know, he just couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. We none of us, you know, and this was Germany. I mean, my goodness, a very civilized country. Who could think? And I was more German than Hitler, really. I'm born in Germany. I can trace my family back so far, 1625 or something. I mean, they were there before, but I have a family tree up to then. One of the most important writers, the Mark Twain of Germany, Bertolt Auerbach, he changed his name from Moses Baruch Auerbacher, my name, to Bertolt Auerbach. He wanted to be more German than German. Jewish. Moses was a Jewish name, so he Germanized it. And he became very well-liked Black Forest writer. He has a museum in the castle there. In fact, I put my little book next to his, whatever. But now, all of a sudden, they're rediscovering him. And he found out at the end of his life, no matter what you do, you're still a Jew. And you still are mistreated, no matter what. Even changing the name or whatever. And I know people are saying, well, you could have changed your name. You could have changed your religion. Well, I will never change my religion. I am what I am. If I have to die for it, I would do it again. I am who I am. I mean, I didn't choose the religion. I was born into it, and I'll keep it until I die. You're born what you are. Then life isn't easy. But you are. And I'm proud to be. Like Mayor Koch, who just died, our wonderful mayor. I met him on a plane once. He didn't ride first class. He was with the cattle cars with us in the train, on the plane, you know, on the tourist, and he's a tall guy. He put on his, you know about Mayor Koch, right? Our mayor, very famous American New York mayor. And he put on his tombstone the quote from Daniel Pearl, who was beheaded by Muslim extremists. He said, before he died, my father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, and I am Jewish. And he wanted that on his tombstone. Now, not all Muslims are terrorists. Now, I live in a multi-ethnic neighborhood in Queens. The most multi-ethnic is Queens, of all of America. Our houses are attached on all sides. And on one side, I have a very devout Muslim family from Bangladesh, which was India at one time, because they were fighting the Hindus with the Muslims, so they divided Bangladesh and Pakistan. They became Muslim countries. And on the other side, a Hindu family from British Guyana. They originally came from India and were sent there as indentured servants. That's my next book, by the way. Interesting family. 6 children, 3 doctors, 3 master's degrees. Wonderful. And the mother was sewing curtains in the sweatshop, the father garden, Metropolitan Museum of Art. So we are good friends with each other. It is possible. And one cannot stereotype. That's what I tell the kids. Not all Muslims, yet there are bad people there. But bad people occur in every people. In every people there are bad apples. And, but one should not judge. I mean, Muhammad is a wonderful neighbor. And I know if it's snowing there, God forbid, I think they'll clean my snow. I hope so. Because the Hindu family, the daughter married a Jewish boy, and the father-in-law died, and they are now in Florida at this funeral. So nobody's home. Yes. Yes.
I would like to ask you, you had a picture of when you were in the hospital as a child.
Yeah. Well,
first of all, who took care of you? And second of all, what did they do to take care of you? We have some children here. Going to the hospital is traumatic no matter who you are or what age you are. That picture was horrifying.
Yeah,
Could you speak to that?
Well, it was horrifying for me too to be separated from my family. Not only that, we heard that they would take parents away and we would be left alone. We had nurses there and very good doctors, but there was very little medicine. And we were so many children, they couldn't do much with us. It was just, I mean, I lost my voice, I was covered by boils, full of lice, nobody took care of me, the bed was wet all the time with this baby in my bed. But somehow I made it. I just made it. And they had this little window, I remember, we would climb over the beds. And we had a whistle. I can't whistle anymore. But anyway, I knew it was my dad, floors below, because they weren't allowed to come in, and we would run. And anybody check here? Yeah, do you understand check? So there was something I learned, it sounded like this. Ovino, no, wait a minute. Come to the small window. Something, Ohino, I forgot now. It passed. But anyway, we were alone, yeah, for months. And the fear of that your parents will be sent away, being left alone, that was tremendous. And not only that, most of the kids there spoke Czech. I didn't speak Czech. But I had to learn a little bit, and I learned to count. In the morning, we would be in the courtyard in the beginning. We count off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Am I correct? Okay. Naskledano, rukulibam, and stuff like kleb and brambories were potatoes, very important. My mother used to go in the potato sellers at night. There was a curfew. And one would watch, and she would steal some potatoes, get them, and we would sleep on those potatoes. And there's a poem in the book called Diamonds on the Snow, you got to read this, about how precious these potatoes were. They were our diamonds. And once there was an inspection, these Aufsehweiber, these women who would come to search everything from the outside, non-Jewish women, and we had to go in the courtyard and wait, and if they would find one potato, you were finished. You were finished. Yes?
In school, we are learning about the Holocaust, and one of the things we learned was that in the camps, the people would get like tattoos of their number on them. Do you have a tattoo?
No, that was in Auschwitz as a registration mark. For registration. That's it. The tattoos were given to the people who were allowed to live a while, in slave labor many times. Very few people stayed in Auschwitz a long time. They'd send them to the sub-camps to work in munitions factories, all kinds of things, slave labor. I have a number, 131-408. It wasn't tattooed, but it's tattooed on my soul. Yeah.
You kind of touched on it a little, but not really in depth. You said that your father didn't think that he would ever leave Germany and that this would never happen. But were there people who saw the signs, saw the warnings, and got out before it got bad?
Some did, yes.
And were there people having conversations about it and talking openly before it all happened?
Well, I mean, there were whispers and things who got a visa to get out and so forth. But yeah, I mean, some people did get out who had the opportunity. If you had a sponsor, for instance, now my father needed a higher sponsor because he was a disabled war veteran. At that time, you know, America said, well, you cannot go on welfare here. Even when we came here, my hospital bill, which was about, I was in a state institution, I think it was about $5 a day, something like that. It's unbelievable, in '46. And a Jewish organization paid for them. My parents didn't have the money. They were working as a couple, my mother a maid, my father a butler in this rich house there, and making maybe $100 for both of them for the whole months, whatever. We were not able. And we could not find a higher sponsor for my dad, although we had some relatives here and they didn't want to do anything either. You know, sometimes family, you know, and one uncle said, my mother called up an uncle, he had a business on Fifth Avenue, a very big ceramic business. And my mother said, you know, when my father came out of Dachau, we got to get out, you have to help us. He said, well, we have so much unemployment right now. You want to add to the unemployment? So that was also the case. You know, there was nobody who cared. Roosevelt certainly didn't open the doors to us. You know about the boat that was at the harbor, I think in Miami, the St. Louis. I have a friend who was on there. She was 2 years old. They wouldn't let the boat come in, shipped it back to Europe, and almost all those people died. They were here in America, first in Cuba, and then they wouldn't let them in here either, in the harbor.
One final.
It happened. The world didn't care.
One final question.
For instance, my father has a second cousin. His mother is a Strauss, and he became a physicist, PhD. The father an Auerbacher, the mother a Strauss. He always thought, oh, well, the Auerbachers, they're the cattle dealers. But the Strauss, they own Macy's. Macy's, the department store, was owned by the Strauss family, and very closely related to them. And but then he found out there's this writer in the family. Then he only wanted to be an Auerbacher, and they did get the papers from the owner of Macy's to come here. You know what they told him? Never come to see us. That was the answer. Nobody cared, but they did get out. Yeah.
Inge, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Inge will be out signing books if you want to purchase a book and get her autograph. We have some cookies out there also. If you'll please let Inge exit first before you begin exiting. Thank you.